Hello and welcome. My name is Katrina Hulme-Cross. I'm the Senior Editor for Speechmark, now part of Routledge Education. Many thanks indeed for taking the time out today to listen to my presentation on how to get your book published. Hopefully what follows will help you to better understand the publishing process and more specifically the process of getting your idea accepted for publication. It has been written with first-timers in mind, as a lot of Speechmark authors tend to be brand new to the process. Speechmark publishes a vast range of books, flashcards and games across social and emotional well-being, speech and language and special educational needs. Most of our books are spiral-bound resources, full of session plans, activities, etc. But we also publish an increasing number of picture books and the occasional textbook. Some of our authors are academics, but most of them are practitioners. And whilst academic experience is important for some publishers' lists and for certain types of books, at Speechmark we greatly value professional expertise. Whilst I work at Speechmark, this presentation isn't necessarily specific to getting published with us. It contains general information and advice that you can use to get published with any professional or academic publisher. But what it definitely isn't about is about trade or mass market publishing, which is a whole different ballgame. So if you want advice on how to get the novel out there, I'm afraid I'm not the best qualified. So the following presentation will touch relatively briefly on a number of topics, on what a publisher actually does, where to begin when you have an idea for publication, what editors are looking for in an idea or new proposal, how to write your book proposal, what happens after it is submitted, what is the review and approval process, and there'll be some hints and tips about writing, both from me and from our case study authors. And finally, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the publishing process and about what happens after submission of a manuscript. I will at the end give you my email address so that you can get in touch with any questions. So what does a book publisher actually do? Well, a book publisher is a group or possibly a person who is responsible for bringing a book to the public for reading purposes. A book publisher is involved in the major steps of developing, producing, printing, marketing and distributing the book. The image that many authors have of a publisher is one of rigour, accuracy, quality and reputation. Publishing is also seen as a creative industry which supports authors in the dissemination of new research and innovative ideas. And all of this is certainly true. However, publishing is also a business. We are not publicly funded, and so commercial considerations are also important. I know that for most of you this will seem like a statement of the obvious, but the point is that when we assess your book proposal, we are not just looking at its academic, professional or creative merit, as important as all of these things are. We also need to know that the book is a good fit with our list, and that we have a clear and achievable route to market. In other words, that we'll be able to sell it. And finally, here's my view of what a publisher does. And that's not a publisher waving, but drowning under a sea of manuscripts. At Routledge, and at most publishing houses, every commissioning editor is set a target to commission a certain number of books a year, and this amounts to approximately one a week. Then of course there's the books that we commissioned in previous years that are now arriving on our desks as manuscripts, all of which need reading, some of which require a considerable amount of work. So at any one time I can have 100 or so book projects at various stages of the process, from proposal to production, so it's a really busy job. So given how busy most commissioning editors are, how to ensure your proposal gets their attention? So where to start on your publishing journey? Well, all new book projects always start with a good idea, and this might come from anywhere. It might come out of some research you've been doing at work or university, or something you've thought of in the course of your day-to-day work. Perhaps you struggle to find information or resources to support you with a particular problem or client group, or noticed others struggling. Perhaps you think there's something that could be done quicker or more simply with the right tools. As I mentioned at the start, a lot of Speechmark resources evolve out of content that people have already produced and are using in their daily practice. A lot of the time, an idea is born out of identifying a gap in the market. Finding that gap is actually a big part of what I do. And a gap can appear due to changes to the political agenda. Perhaps the competition is out of date or weak. Perhaps some new research has come out, or there have been changes to the curriculum. Possibly new guidance has been released, or there's been changes to legislation. Perhaps someone's developed a new approach or intervention. Or quite simply, maybe there's nothing else out there. So you've had your idea, now to think about the best forum. Is it actually a book? Books take a while to write and 6 months to produce. Will the moments have passed by then? How time sensitive is your idea? Is it really specialist or narrowly focused? Who will want to read it, and how much is there actually to say on the topic? Is it more appropriate for a journal article, chapter in a larger book, internal publication, conference paper or workshop? If it is a book, what type of book is it? Is the book based on research, your PhD maybe, in which case it is most likely best suited to a monograph? Will your book have lots of chapters and different contributors, in which case you're probably thinking of an edited collection? Or will the book be really practical and contain lots of activities, session plans, assessment tools? Is it geared towards the practitioner market? In which case you're thinking of a practical resource or manual. Will the content be written for students and in line with a particular course or module? So maybe you're thinking about a textbook. Or perhaps your idea is something else, a picture book or a novel perhaps. Whatever the idea, I would always recommend discussing it with others to get a range of perspectives. You could talk to colleagues, with those who have published in the field, with a series editor, with a commissioning editor. Perhaps most importantly, you could talk to your target market. Do they actually think they need this? Or are they using other books that are perfectly fit for purpose? You could even test out the idea by writing some sample materials and giving them to your intended market to try out. Stephen Parsons and Anna Branagan are two of Speechmark's best-selling authors of Language for Thinking and Word-Aware. And when I was putting together this presentation, I thought it might be interesting to share their story of how their first book, Language for Thinking, came about. And this is what they said. So it was the late 90s. They were both working as speech and language therapists in Hackney. And they'd been using blank levels and applying these to another resource, Think It, Say It, but they found the whole process really cumbersome. They had a brilliant assistant who could deliver therapy very efficiently for most language areas, but the notable gap was verbal reasoning and inference. And given there was nothing else out there, they decided to create their own resources that would make intervention more efficient and effective. I asked Stephen and Anna for their top tips on how to develop an idea for publication, and this is what they said. Start with a clinical problem and then find a solution. You need to know how your book will differ, i.e. be better, than the competition. And you need to focus on your target audience and develop your book idea for them. Research publishers and how your book will fit with their list. So you've got your big idea, and now you need to flesh it out in writing in the form of a book proposal, in order to submit it to a publisher for formal consideration. Your proposal is your chance to sell your idea, so make sure it clearly says what the book will be about, who you are writing it for, why they need it, what will be in your book, what your book will offer that others do not, what features, illustrations and e-resources will be required. This is your chance to advertise yourself, your author voice, your idea. This is your pitch. Different publishers may have a slightly different style of form, but the elements of proposals will most likely be the same. And a proposal form can at first glance seem overwhelming, but all of the questions are designed to guide you step by step through the process, and whilst there are a lot of headings, you don't have to write that much for each. I always say to people, please do get in touch as you're putting together the proposal with any questions, big or small. For this reason, it's really worth identifying and contacting the commissioning editor of your chosen publisher before you submit a proposal, as it saves a lot of time in the long run. You can outline your idea right at the start to check it's something the publisher might be interested in. Plus, you then have a contact during the writing process. So what's in a proposal? Well, it obviously needs you to identify the title and the subtitle, who the author and/or editor is. You need to talk about the readership and the market, and these might not be the same thing. You need to give the rationale for your book idea and a synopsis. You also need to include your proposed contents and discuss the competition and how your book will compare. Finally, you'll need to put in some specifications and timescale. So you need to talk about how long you think it's going to be, whether it's going to include any illustrations, and how long do you think you're going to take to write it. And what does an editor look for in a proposal? I always think that the best proposals are based on quality research and/or professional experience. They really show that they will appeal to a specific market and that they do or say something new. They add to the conversation in the field and are well written and structurally coherent, and that they have qualified authors. So you finish your proposal, you've identified the publisher and commissioning editor you want to submit it to, and you email it off to them. So proposal submitted. Now what? Well, once received, the commissioning editor will take time to read and assess the proposal to see whether they think it has merit for publication. If they think there is potential there, they will send the proposal out for peer review. This process can take between 4 to 6 weeks. And when the feedback comes in, they will discuss it with you. If the feedback recommends various changes to the proposal, then it might be that they ask you to develop the proposal further and resubmit it, and then it might even be sent out for second review. But assuming all of the feedback is really positive and supportive of publication, then the commissioning editor will then prepare it for presentation to the publishing committee, and it is the publishing committee who have the final sign-off. Hopefully, they're really enthusiastic about your idea and they give the commissioning editor the go-ahead to offer you a contract. Going back to our case study, I asked Stephen and Anna to offer their thoughts on the actual process of writing their first book, so after you get offered that contract. So they said that the contract came back with an agreed deadline, which was really exciting but also quite intimidating. It suddenly gets real. And they said that the deadline really focused their minds. So throughout the writing process, they met every 2 weeks. They were working full-time with Anna on maternity leave for some of this time, so they decided to divide the writing into a series of small tasks to make it more manageable. Originally, they said they wrote a much longer introduction and research element, which they ended up cutting after asking themselves, who is still reading this? So this goes back to keeping your market in mind at all times. It may seem a bit abstract at the moment or a long way off, but I thought I'd include a few top tips about the actual writing part, some do's and don'ts. Do write for your audience. Write in a clear, plain style. Use consistent tenses. Use the first person economically and strategically. Try to tell a story. Think about your illustrations well in advance and carefully consider how the reader will use them. And some don'ts. Don't simply copy and paste from a PhD or any other existing resource. Chances are that it won't be fit for purpose. You need to definitely adapt it. Don't throw everything in. Be really selective. Don't use archaic terms or jargon, and don't overcomplicate. And don't use illustrations as mere decorations. Every illustration that you include will increase the page count of the book, which in turn will impact on the cost and ultimately might increase the price that we have to charge. So you're writing away and months pass, sometimes years, but ideally not. The problem with taking too long is that you don't want content to date and you don't want to lose motivation. Most manuscripts, I'd say, take 6 months, but I do negotiate deadlines up to 18 months, depending on the individual situation. So Do keep in touch with the commissioning editor. We don't just send you off after the contract has been signed, not to be seen until the deadline. We will check in periodically, but we're also there as and when you need us. If you want to share sample chapters, or if you've got questions about permissions, or you're not sure how to format the illustrations, perhaps you're running over length or running behind time, it's always better to have that conversation as soon as possible. So the deadline approaches and you're looking at submission for publication. I would say that before you submit your manuscript, really important to have someone else read it. Could be a colleague, could be your mum, whoever. You've had your head down in this manuscript for months and it can be invaluable to invite a fresh perspective. So once you've submitted, the commissioning editor will also read it, obviously, and they will give you feedback. So if they think anything needs to be tweaked, expanded or cut, they will let you know then. Once they're happy with it, it will be formally accepted. And then actually once the manuscript's formally accepted, that's when marketing starts, because once it's formally accepted, information starts feeding out to the likes of Amazon. And the manuscript, once it's in production, goes through the copy editing process, typesetting, proofreading. And I'm not going to go into great detail about the production process, but I will say that if you are new to publishing, this can all be explained in detail once the manuscript is submitted. And the average book takes 5 to 6 months to be produced. And when it is published, it's published in print and also as an ebook as standard. And then obviously once it's published, that's when active sales commence. So for the final slide, I thought I'd go back to Stephen and Anna, who wanted to share some final thoughts on the importance of self-promotion. Whilst publishers do obviously do a lot to promote books, it is often more authentic and immediate if authors get in on the act as well. And these days that means websites as well as social media. And Stephen and Anna also ran courses which obviously got them more widely known and increased sales. So if you are thinking about being an author in this day and age, it really is important to put some effort into your presence on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc., because it can be a really great means of self-promotion. Many thanks indeed for listening today. My email address is here. Please do get in touch if you have any questions, large or small, about any part of the publishing process, or if you want to discuss a specific idea that you might have for a book. Many thanks indeed.